The clerk noticed the way she favored her left leg the moment she walked in. "Ma'am, standing steady for a long-range shot takes real balance," he said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Might want to try something a little more forgiving." She didn't answer. She just picked up the rifle anyway and asked for a target set at 200 yards. Holloway Firearms sat at the edge of a small river town, the kind of shop that had built its reputation over 2 decades on a mix of hunting supplies, competitive shooters, and a steady trickle of tourists who wandered in expecting more excitement than the ordinary business of buying ammunition usually provided. Odessa Vance walked in on an overcast Wednesday afternoon, wearing a plain field jacket and jeans, her left leg carrying a slight, permanent hitch in its stride, the kind of limp that came from an old injury rather than anything recent. She moved through the store with the unhurried confidence of someone who had walked into places exactly like this one more times than she could easily count, her eyes tracking the rifle wall with the specific attention of a person reading something they already knew well. Denny Holbrook, 26, had worked the counter at his uncle's shop for 3 years and had developed, in that time, a set of instincts about customers he trusted completely. He watched Odessa's uneven gait as she approached the case containing the store's precision rifles and made his assessment before she'd said a single word. "Help you find something," he said, in the tone of someone expecting the answer to disqualify itself. "The bolt action there," Odessa said, pointing to a rifle mounted apart from the others, older, with a worn walnut stock. "I'd like to hold it." Denny glanced at her leg again, then at the rifle, then back at her leg. "Ma'am, standing steady for a long-range shot takes real balance," he said, pitching his voice to carry across the store, where 2 other customers near the ammunition wall glanced over with the specific interest people reserve for a moment that promises to be at least mildly entertaining. "Might want to try something a little more forgiving. We've got some lighter options over here that don't require as much of a stable base." "I'd like to hold that one," Odessa said again, without any particular heat. Denny hesitated, glanced toward the back office where the owner was occupied with paperwork, and lifted the rifle down with the exaggerated care of someone handling something fragile in front of an audience. Odessa picked it up, checked the chamber, verified the safety, and began breaking it down into its components with a fluency that had nothing hesitant in it at all, her hands moving through the sequence with the specific economy of someone who had done this exact thing thousands of times across circumstances considerably less comfortable than a Rivertown gun shop on an overcast Wednesday. "I'd like to see your range," she said, once she'd reassembled it. "Target at 200 yards. Denny's eyebrows went up. "Our standing line set for 100 tops. "Then today's a good day to change that," Odessa said. "If something about this woman's comm is already sitting with you the way it should, this is a good moment to send this video to a friend who needs to see what happens next." The range at Holloway was modest, 6 lanes, adjustable rails that technically extended further than anyone in recent memory had bothered pushing them. Denny adjusted the rail with visible reluctance, and the 2 customers who'd been browsing the ammunition wall drifted back to watch, along with an older man in a canvas jacket who'd been standing near the register the entire time, arms crossed, saying nothing. Odessa loaded 5 rounds. Her stance, when she settled into it, favored her right leg slightly, compensating for the limp in a way that looked, to Denny's untrained eye, like exactly the kind of instability he'd predicted. She breathed once, went still, and fired, 5 times in quick succession. Denny's first instinct was to look for 5 separate impacts. What he found instead, through the range's spotting scope, was a single ragged hole, dead center, the kind of grouping that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with a relationship to a rifle built over years most people never got the chance to have. The range went completely silent. The man in the canvas jacket, who had been watching with his arms crossed since the moment Odessa walked onto the range, straightened up slowly, his expression shifting into something considerably more careful than the mild curiosity he'd carried a minute earlier. "That's not possible," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "Not from that stance. Not at that distance." Odessa lowered the rifle, cleared the chamber out of old habit, and set it down on the range bench with the same unhurried calm she'd carried since walking through the front door. "Subscribe. Actually, forget the formalities. Just stay with us." Because what happens at the front counter over the next 20 minutes is only the beginning of what this story actually turns out to be about. Ma'am, Denny said, his earlier dismissiveness entirely gone, replaced by something closer to genuine unease. How is that even possible? Your stance should have thrown that grouping off by inches. The limp compensates for itself once you've built the right muscle memory around it, Odessa said. It took me years to relearn stability after the injury. But once you've relearned something like that at that level of necessity, it becomes more reliable than a lot of people's version of normal ever was to begin with. What kind of injury does that? Denny asked. Odessa considered the question, weighing, the way she weighed most questions now, exactly how much of an honest answer the moment actually deserved. The kind that happens in places most people never hear about, she said. A long time ago, the man in the canvas jacket had stepped closer during this exchange, studying her face with a specific intensity that had nothing to do with the shooting demonstration anymore. Say your name, he said quietly. Odessa Vance. Something in his expression shifted, a slow recognition surfacing from someplace considerably deeper than casual memory. I served with a Vance once, he said. A long time ago. Different unit, different country. We called her Steady before the injury and Steady anyway after it, because nothing about the way she operated actually changed. You're Marsh, Odessa said. It wasn't a question. Corporal Marsh. You used to hum off-key during watch rotations and swear you didn't. Marsh's composed face cracked into something that looked, unmistakably, like decades falling away all at once. Nobody's called me that in 22 years, he said. They spoke quietly near the range bench for several minutes. The rest of the store's ordinary Wednesday afternoon rhythm resuming cautiously around them. Denny hovering nearby, with the specific uncertain posture of a young man recalibrating an entire framework of assumptions in real time. I looked for you, Marsh said, once the initial shock of recognition had settled into something quieter. After everything ended, filed requests through channels that mostly went nowhere. Eventually someone told me, off the record, that pursuing it further wasn't going to end well for my own file, and I stopped. I've spent 22 years wondering if I stopped too easily. You didn't stop too easily, Odessa said. I made myself very hard to find. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't something any amount of persistence on your end would have undone. Some doors get closed from the inside. Is that what today is? You deciding to open it? I don't know yet, Odessa said. I think today is just a door that got opened by accident, by a clerk who underestimated me loudly enough that you happened to be standing close enough to hear it. Whether it stays open is a different question. It was during this quiet reunion that the second event of that afternoon began. Though nobody in the store registered it as anything unusual at first. A woman named Priya Osei walked through the front entrance, agitated, her voice already raised before the door had fully closed behind her. I need someone to look at this rifle my husband bought here last month, she said to Denny, setting a case down hard on the counter. It's been misfiring. He almost lost 2 fingers on the range yesterday. I want to know if this store sold him something defective, because if it did, we're going to have a much bigger conversation than a return. Denny, still visibly shaken from the last 20 minutes, opened the case with unsteady hands. The rifle inside was a mid-range hunting model, nothing exotic, and at first glance nothing appeared obviously wrong with it. Odessa, still standing near the counter with Marsh, glanced over without being asked and said, quietly, "May I look?" Priya, frustrated and not particularly inclined to trust anyone else in the building at that moment, hesitated before nodding. Odessa examined the rifle with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything else that afternoon, checking the bolt action, the chamber, the trigger assembly, her fingers moving with the specific confidence of someone who had spent considerable time troubleshooting firearms in conditions where a malfunction meant considerably more than an inconvenient range trip. The extractor's been reassembled incorrectly, she said after a moment. Somebody serviced this recently and put the spring back in with the wrong tension. It's not a manufacturing defect. It's a service error, and it's the kind that can cause exactly the malfunction your husband experienced. She looked at Denny, who services rifles for this store. Denny swallowed. We send them out. A shop 2 towns over. Then that shop owes this family an explanation, and probably a great deal more than that, Odessa said. This isn't a cosmetic issue. A malfunction like this, at the wrong moment, doesn't just cost someone fingers. It can cost considerably more. Priya's anger, which had walked through the door aimed squarely at Holloway Firearms, found a new and more accurate target within the space of about 90 seconds, and the specific relief of having her husband's near injury finally explained by someone who clearly knew what she was looking at replaced most of the frustration in her voice. "Thank you," she said to Odessa. "Nobody's taken 5 minutes to actually look at this thing since it happened. Everyone just wanted to argue about liability. Liability matters less right now than making sure this doesn't happen to someone else," Odessa said. "I'd get that outside shop's other recent work checked, if I were the owner here. Is my husband going to be all right?" He said it just clipped him, but he's been favoring that hand ever since. "He should see a doctor if he hasn't already, just to be thorough," Odessa said. "But from what you're describing, it sounds like he was lucky. A malfunction like this at full extension, at the wrong angle, can cost considerably more than a clipped finger. Whoever taught him to keep his hand positioned the way he apparently did probably saved him from a much worse afternoon." Priya's expression shifted slightly. "He said his uncle taught him. Said the man drilled proper hand placement into him for years before he ever let him near a real rifle. Then his uncle did him a genuine service," Odessa said. "Tell your husband that. Sometimes the boring fundamentals people drill into us for years turn out to be the exact thing standing between an inconvenience and a tragedy, and nobody realizes it until the day it actually matters." Denny, absorbing this second demonstration of competence in under half an hour, looked at Odessa with an expression that had moved entirely past his earlier dismissiveness into something considerably more humbled. "I'll talk to my uncle," he said. "Today. If you've ever watched someone completely underestimated turn out to be exactly the person a room needed, hit that like button right now, because the story of what this one afternoon actually set in motion is only getting started." Marsh stayed at the store considerably longer than he'd originally planned, watching Odessa work through the rifle issue with Priya, something in his expression suggesting he was recalculating, in real time, exactly how much of the woman he remembered had actually stayed the same across 22 years. "You always did that," he said, once Priya had left with assurances that the store would handle both the repair and a conversation with the outside gunsmith. "Fixed the thing nobody else noticed was actually broken, while everyone around you was still arguing about who to blame." "Old habit," Odessa said. "Blame doesn't fix anything. Understanding the actual mechanism usually does." "Are you still in the area? Or is this a passing-through kind of visit?" "I live about 40 minutes from here," Odessa said. "Have for the past 6 years. I don't get out much, if I'm honest. The leg makes some things harder than they used to be, and I stopped minding my own company a long time ago." Marsh considered that for a moment. "There's a group," he said. "Some of us who served together, in different configurations over the years, meet twice a month. Nothing formal. Mostly just people who understand certain kinds of silence without needing it explained." He hesitated. "I didn't know you were even still dash." He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, the specific caution of a man realizing, mid-thought, that he'd nearly said something considerably heavier than he'd intended to. "Still alive," Odessa finished for him, without any particular weight in her voice. "I know. I let a lot of people believe otherwise for a long time. It was easier than explaining. Would you want to come?" To the group. "No pressure. Just an open door, if you ever decide you want it." Odessa was quiet for a moment, looking out through the store's front windows at the overcast afternoon light. "Maybe," she said. It wasn't a yes. It also wasn't a no. The store's owner, a heavy-set man named Holloway himself who had finally emerged from the back office once word of the afternoon's events reached him secondhand, approached Odessa near the front counter with the specific, careful respect of a man trying to make up for an employee's mistake without fully understanding the scope of what that mistake had actually been. "I understand my nephew gave you some trouble earlier," he said. "He gave me the same trouble most people give a stranger they've already decided they understand," Odessa said. "It wasn't personal. It's just common. I'd like to make it right somehow. Discount on the rifle, if you're interested in it. Or dash," he paused, considering. "Actually, I could use someone who knows precision shooting the way you clearly do. Semi-regular basis. Consulting on inventory, maybe some coaching for our competitive shooters. I'll pay properly for it." Odessa looked at him for a long moment, then at Denny, standing nearby, with the specific chastened posture of a young man who had learned something considerably larger than he'd expected to learn on an ordinary Wednesday shift. "I'll think about it," she said. She left Holloway Firearms a little after 4 that afternoon, the overcast sky finally beginning to clear as she walked to her car, her Limp carrying her at the same unhurried pace it always did, the specific rhythm she'd built over years of learning to trust a body that didn't move the way it used to, and didn't need to still accomplish everything it had ever been asked to do. 3 days later, Odessa returned to Holloway Firearms, not for the rifle, but to speak with the owner about his offer. She found Denny at the counter, considerably more attentive to the customers around him than he had been on her first visit, watching each interaction with a new, subtle carefulness that hadn't been there before. "I talked to my uncle," Denny said, before she could say anything, "about the gunsmith shop. He's already pulled 3 other rifles they serviced recently for inspection. Found 2 more assembly errors. Thankfully nothing anyone had fired yet." "Good," Odessa said. "That's the part that actually matters." "The gunsmith shop's owner came by yesterday, actually," Denny continued. "Wanted to argue about it at first. Said we were making a mountain out of a routine service variance. My uncle asked him to explain the extractor spring tension discrepancy across 3 separate rifles, and he didn't have an answer that held up. He's bringing in an outside inspector now, on his own dime, to review everything that shop's touched in the last 6 months." "That's the correct response, even if it took some pushing to get there," Odessa said. "Most people would rather argue about blame than actually fix the underlying problem. It's good that your uncle didn't let him. I also wanted to say," Denny continued, "I've been thinking about what happened. Not just the shooting. The way I looked at you and decided, before you said a word, what you were and weren't capable of. I do that constantly, I think. I just never had it demonstrated back to me quite that clearly before." "Most people don't," Odessa said. "The mistake isn't making the initial judgment. Everyone does that, whether they admit it or not. The mistake is refusing to update it once the evidence changes right in front of you." Holloway emerged from the back office and confirmed the consulting arrangement with considerably more formality than their conversation 3 days earlier had carried, and Odessa agreed to come in twice a week, working with the store's competitive shooting program and, more quietly, continuing to review recent gunsmith work that Denny's uncle had started pulling in for a full audit. Marsh came by that same afternoon, not entirely by coincidence, and the 3 of them stood near the counter for a while. The specific easy quiet of people who had each, in their own way, had an ordinary day reorganized into something considerably more meaningful than they'd expected when they woke up that morning. "I'm going to the group meeting Thursday," Marsh said. "If you change your mind." "I might," Odessa said. "No promises." "Wouldn't expect any," Marsh said. "You never made promises you weren't planning to keep. 22 years hasn't changed that either, apparently." Odessa allowed something that wasn't quite a smile to cross her face, the specific small warmth of someone recognizing that a door she'd kept carefully shut for a very long time had, without her fully deciding to, started letting in a little more light than she was used to. She showed up at Thursday's meeting, quietly, sitting near the back, saying very little for most of the evening. But she came back the following month, and the one after that, and within a year, the small group Marsh had described as informal and unstructured had, without anyone officially deciding it should, gained a member who was quietly teaching 2 of the younger veterans in attendance some of the same precision fundamentals she'd once taught to people whose names never made it onto any personnel file anyone was cleared to read. Denny stayed at Holloway Firearms, eventually taking over more of the store's daily operations as his uncle's health required him to step back, and he ran his own intake process very differently than he had on the afternoon Odessa Vance first walked through that door. He asked more questions before deciding what anyone standing at his counter actually deserved, and though it didn't make him perfect at reading people, it made him considerably slower to conclude, which, he'd come to understand, was most of what the job had actually required of him all along. Some people carry more than one kind of injury into a room, the visible kind and the kind nobody thinks to ask about, and some ordinary Wednesday afternoons. Both of those injuries turn out to matter considerably less than what a person actually chooses to do despite carrying them. Odessa had spent a long time believing her leg told people everything they needed to know about what she could and couldn't manage. It took one overcast afternoon and a stranger's careless assumption to remind her that the story her body told and the story of what she was actually capable of had never been quite the same thing at all. If this story kept you here until the very last word, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the parts of us that look like limitations from the outside are sometimes exactly the parts we've already learned, quietly, to work around.